But if you're saying you don't like Jordan Peterson because he has a bad haircut, that's not a particularly cogent critique. That he's an elitist ass who doesn't know his ass from his elbow. You know, uh, that's the real reason. But
Right. I think like you were mentioning Scientism, like you did a video with Alex Sherman where you talked about Scientism. Do you think like you also mentioned Jordan Peterson, uh, it's like I mean, I feel like a theme of a lot of your criticism and a lot of your writing about art is kind of well, it's sort of against Philistinism. It's against kind of people, like you're saying, kind of kind of pretending to know about stuff they really have no clue about, and but it's that kind of macho thing too for a lot of people. I mean, it's obviously not clearly, it's not specific to men, but it's that kind of. But just the other day, I was in a bar with my friend Mark and Weston, and we encountered these horrible, obnoxious 20-year-olds who were, they were anti-vaxxers, and they were very, they thought they were very interesting and eccentric and beautiful, and they took every chance to sort of, impress us and boast about, what raconteurs they were, how talented they were, and and it seemed that every time kind of we kind of sort of mentioned something that we were doing, or even we just used a word they didn't know, they kind of seized upon it, kind of like a hawk, as if it was something else they could use to beat someone over the head with. Is it? I find it very difficult, now, like in the sort of the 21st century. I think this sort of where kind of Philistinism is sort of encouraged. And of course, this is sort of a theme kind of with your criticism where you say, hacks get rewarded, and it's who you know, and kind of the lowest common denominator. What's the kind of antidote to kind of this silenism, this sort of Philistinism, to kind of use a term that Peterson uses, and what's the antidote to this kind of this these farts, really? Is it because I was talking about this with Jess? Is it do we like just do we is it an attempt to kind of point out kind of their what they're doing, or do we have to kind of not participate? Like, is it all a bit of a trap?
I mean, let me give you an example. I was just watching you as I mentioned the boom boom boom. I turned my volume down a little bit. I can still hear the boom boom boom, but I noticed as you were walking, people can't see you on camera, but you were walking around your flat or whatnot, and it was making noises, and see, I can hear noises now. It's probably recording this, but I was
I
thinking to myself,
apologize.
boy, he's walking around his apartment like a wandering Jew. Now, if I said wandering Jew, there's going to be some young kid who's going to think that that's some kind of anti-Semitic slur. That I just said, don't make, they'd be like, don't make fun of Ethan's being a Jew. What is wrong with you or something? There would be people that wouldn't even know that has nothing to do that refers to a biblical thing, the Jews wandering in the desert for 40 years or whatnot. But you just have, I mean, if I know that what I'm saying is not anti-Semitic or whatnot. Well, if someone takes it as anti-Semitic, that's ridiculous, and that's their problem, not mine.
But it's scary though when people can weaponize ignorance against intelligence, against learning. I mean, another example, someone I was on the internet the other day, and someone was sharing a drawing which they had made with pen and ink, and it was stippled, so it was using lots of little dots, and everyone was falling over themselves to say, "Look, pointillism," and those of us who were in the know, we pointed out, no, that's not pointillism. Pointillism refers to something very specific, a very specific thing, a very specific technique. This is stippling, and then everyone kind of like rounded against us, kind of like we were like, oh, these fucking know-it-alls. They think art is for everyone. You can't tell us what's what. And it's like how that's the kind of frustration there. All this great art, all these amazing novels and paintings and whatever. It all just gets ground down to the same crap, or like it doesn't matter. I say what it is.
Well, people are going to opine about things that they don't know. I mean, I said when I was speaking with Alex, I think in that video I did last week, I said, you're not going to hear me talk about post-Soviet politics in Bulgaria because I don't know anything of it. I can talk about art, I can talk philosophy, some science, and whatnot. And I've interviewed enough people that I sometimes know what to expect or not. But you know.
The character of Joey Greco, like you said that the making them into sort of having two people, the sort of the Joey Greco doppelgangers. That was inspired by a TV show, was it? Was that not the man from UNCLE? Like was that a TV show idea?
No, that's a classic soap opera trope. I've watched many soap operas for years, and there's always someone gets killed or seemingly killed. They come back a year later, played by a different actor, and then a year after that, the original actor wants to come back and take over the role. So you end up with, if you have Bill in 2020, Bill is killed off and his actor goes to prime time. His show fails. They bring Bill back, played by some guy named Ted, and then you have who is the real character? Is it the original one or the other one? So I thought, well, let's do that. Let's substitute the character, and this is also a trope that goes to back to like The Prisoner. The Prisoner has an episode where there's a doppelganger, a guy who's given surgery to look just like him. So.
Because I was thinking a bit, I was sort of thinking a bit of Jerry Anderson too. That happens a lot in kind of Jerry Anderson, Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet cartoons, where there's like two people and they have to fight to the death. Yeah. But it also makes me think of what was that? What was that TV show you were talking about when Blue the one when you were making Neville's the soap opera Blue
Coronet Blue.
Coronet Blue, because isn't that about a man with amnesia, like he doesn't know who he is. Yeah. So it's interesting again to think about kind of like the way that kind of like different things from cinema, television, history, true life all come together. Kind of, do you think total immersion is still an applicable thing to say about this book? Do you think this is another example of total immersion, or has your theory of total immersion moved on or changed at all, like since kind of like it first kind of occurred to you?
I mean, it's what it is. But getting back to the total immersion, the total immersion,
yes. Has your not that it has to, but like has your theory of total immersion altered in any way since? Like, is there anything like total immersion and or is it now kind of like a principle of your writing, do you think?
I don't think it all depends on the subject. I mean, a lot of my plays, I get the total immersion kind of thing more in there. It's just you don't want to constantly repeat yourself. There, like I said, this now book is 7 years away from 64 and A Norwegian and the Family, which were the last two of the New York quartet that I wrote. And you have to, I mean, I can go back to it and maybe have one or two scenes that, I have a 6 or 7 page conversation about seemingly nothing, but it's not going to be all of the stuff that I was doing then. Everything has its own reason and comes in. This one was the second book that I said that I using the backward, forward, different motions, although they came to me to use it here first. But this is done more intricately even than Market. And as it
is a very intricate kind of. It seems very intricate to me to read, anyhow. But like you also put poetry at the end of the novel. So you start the novel rather with this kind of cascade of poetry, and then you end it with a few other poems too, including the poem about the painter Stella and the bridge.
Yeah.
When did that occur to you that kind of you would end the novel that way with the poems?
early on. I mean that
That
was sort of
that they would you know, that they would bookend the thing.
yeah. Plus each, I had the idea. I'd written 4 poems years ago, late March, late June, late September, and late December. I thought they were good poems to put in there. They leave you a little bit off balance. You also have to remember the subtitle with the four quartets, the four quartets, the New York quartets,
Yeah.
quartet. I had each of those had subtitles: a novel of men, a novel of this,
True.
memories. This one is a novel of interstices, so it breaks that M mold because it's not part of the quartet, but it's related to it. And an
I love
interstices
that
is
word,
it,
interstices.
yeah,
I love that.
it's
It's
what's in
great.
between.
Interstitial.
Yeah, and so this is like I said, this is if this were Hawaii Five O or some other police drama or some spy drama, I'm not showing you the dramatic reveal of the villain. I'm not showing you the big shootout. What after those shootouts, we're seeing the way that the two Grecos deal with this, that, or the other thing, or the way that Sally Tranghese remembers someone from 40 years ago. Uh, and his 40 years ago, if it's in the 60s, is back in the 1920s when he was a
Mm.
boy or something. So
Mm.
it's a way to go back and forth. So doing just having total immersion in here would sort of go against the grain of the way that that book was going, because it's hard to have interstices when you have a huge chunk. I mean, there are little
You know,
moments
that's very
where
interesting because it makes me think of what you said in another interview, Dan, where you talk about, I believe you were talking about stream of consciousness in literature, right? And you were talking about the whole, you know, Joycean idea of consciousness being a stream. And you said it wasn't like that. Consciousness is like a lacunae, you know, it's like little islets that it breaks and forms different things. Like, in a way, isn't that sort of at least metaphorically, isn't that something kind of similar to this idea of, you know, in interstices, the kind of these sort of things. It's not uh, immersion in of itself. It's also kind of the sort of the various kind of breaks and different kind of paths it takes, sort of the gaps.
well, I mean, that's why, I mean, it's not a novel that, even if you broke it into the two halves, that would necessarily flow. There's not so much of a flow as it is these little bubblings up. It's more like a lava lamp with these little things in these people's lives. And
Yeah.
sometimes the purple blob comes to the top and then it sinks back down, and an orange blob comes this way. A red blob goes sideways or something. And
Yeah, I've
that
been reading about kind of you know, those printmakers, you know, artists of the floating world, and they had a kind of similar kind of visual philosophy of, you know, that things had to kind of you know, in a way kind of form lacunae blobs that sort of separate off, and kind of it was the sort of the the breaks, the movements away from each other as well that were just as important as their, yeah, well, it's getting into weird metaphorical territory here, but
Well, just think about it. When we see love movies, the typical
mm,
Hollywood love story. The boy meets girl. They spend a lot of time on the wooing. They spend a lot. They build up to the big sex scene, 85, 90% into the film, and then
mm,
something happens. Now, a movie that handles that well, but and realistically, is like The Graduate, where Dustin Hoffman wins the young girl from her wedding, and they don't know what to do with each other at the end. So what if you had a novel where most of the characters are in those situations? You don't have to have a big grand gesture of sweeping a woman away from her wedding day and then not feeling things. You could be
mm,
thinking about a little dog that you knew when you were 7, and how it was owned by your neighbor, and then the neighbor moved away one day when you got home from school, and you never saw the dog again, and you wondered what happened to this
mm,
dog, or any kind. The thing that always amazes me, and when I try to get people, whether it's someone like Chin Jun Ziang, or whether it's like Gabe, or whether it's like Joel or other young writers, or someone like Laura Woods, I try to get them to just think about the things that you see. There's a great.
mm.
I mentioned this movie before, Smoke, with Harvey Keitel in it, from the mid '90s. He owns a smoke shop,
Yeah.
and he takes photos every day outside his corner. And he has one scene where he says, or someone says, or either he or the other main character says, this. I don't know. I think Keitel said this smoke shop is just as interesting as the top of Everest. If you were to look around in the shop and see everything, and think about all the things that have been made and all the people that helped make the candy and the cigars and the seat and the windows and the wood trim and all this stuff, all of that goes into that moment. And any person that you see can have that kind of moment. Now, it the problem that most artists have is when I'm doing this, and this goes to someone like Chin, this goes to someone like Gabe, goes to someone like Peter Cleese, it goes to someone like Eva Schubert, is that very few people really get this, that they go for the cheap, they go for, I guess you would call it the cheap Hollywood moments in their art.
You mean going for what one thinks one's supposed to go for?
They want
because the trouble is that kind of leads you to, in a way, kind of almost accept just accept cliches just unwittingly. I mean, like what you were saying about the Keitel scene. I've seen that film before, but saying it again, and I've heard it referenced by the characters in the fiction. It almost seems like a quite sort of dandy-esque thing to say. Like I was reading a biography of that chap, Edward Gorey. I'm not a huge fan of, but he was saying something like, why would I climb to the top? He was saying, why would I climb to the top of Mount Everest? Like when I have when I could obsess over like this some ridiculous old tea cozy or something like that. But it's that kind of thing that can't be taught, isn't it? That kind of, you have to have a kind of almost sort of, it's kind of slightly mad kind of fixation on something that is kind of entirely your own, and it's almost fetishistic.
Well,
but then that becomes the drive for kind of like the art. Like in a way, that's what I was getting at with when I was kind of talking about sexuality with you, because I was also reading anthropology a few weeks ago, and there was this anthropologist who was getting criticized by all these other anthropologists about Japan because he wanted to write a book about how much he found Japanese women beautiful. Like he wanted to write basically a book about his fetish for Japanese women, and all the other anthropologists thought this was just an entirely not credible thing for an anthropologist to write about. We're quite, if we could only quite neatly partition that off to the side. But if you just think about it, like it's not it doesn't beg a belief to think that someone dedicating their entire life to studying and researching a culture, a history, that could begin with something as commonplace as just thinking that Japanese women were quite sexy. It's almost profound in a way, but it's kind of that's the point. When people dig for profundity, it's kind of not there.
Well, you have
there,
anything can be profound. This is one of the things that I had with the people I just mentioned in different ways. Some people have an inability to find those profound moments. Chin is one of those people that sometimes has that problem. Gabe has that problem even bigger. Someone like Joel, who does the podcast with Alex, he's able to sometimes see those moments, but he can't necessarily. There's a rough edge to them. Then there are people like one of my big issues with Eva was she can do that, but she needs to have excitement in her life, personal excitement, and rather than the artist being the one that brings some focus to it, some people like her need to create that kind of drama. And you can write about Japanese women and have a fetish about it, but where do you go from there? Where do you go from there? If all I was doing is doing a cops and robbers, gangsters, kill people, this kind of book, or if let's say I did a novel about well, anything, you have to go from point A to point B, or better yet, go from point A to K.
It's the whole point of kind of like, there's ideas that we think we're supposed to, ideas about art or kind of approaches to art that we're supposed to respond to or are kind of supposed to make sense. And then there's other stuff that just kind of either it isn't on the table. It doesn't seem as credible. That's no way to kind of start off an idea for a book or or a sentence
But a
or
great
or
artist
even
can make it
like
credible. A great artist can make it credible. And whether it's a film, I mean, think of some of the great. I'll give you an example. Jessica and I just rewatched The Red Desert by Antonioni, and it starts off.
yes.
It starts off with this gray sky. It's the first color film we did. Flames being belched
Mm,
from smokestacks, and then we see a weird female character, the attractive Monica Vitti, who just died, who then buys a half-eaten sandwich or just eaten sandwich from some guy because she's not right there. Now, if you said, I'm going to start off the first color film by this great and important artist, and the character is going to be a little whacked and want to buy a sandwich
mm,
from it, and it's still going to end up a great film, you'd be like, that's pretty fucked up. How are you going to do that? But it works. And think about
yes.
how cliched most filmmakers would have started that. So
Mm,
we're gonna have this woman who's mentally ill. They probably most filmmakers would have probably had her do something like looking out a window and trying to scratch through the glass or something melodramatic like that. Yet here we
yeah.
open up with this woman just buying a bitten into sandwich, and
Mm,
that shows you that Antonioni and his scenarists, the people who wrote the screenwriters,
mm.
thought things through, and they got inside that character.
They're also willing to sort of bring things together that might seem disorderly. I mean, I think something that you respond to in the work of Otsu, if you don't mind me saying, and I see in your own work, is a kind of a mixed. Oh, I don't want to say something stupid like the sacred and profane, because that's just sounds just horribly melodramatic. But you'll have a moment which seems very pathos, and then someone will fart or something like that, and it's but there are moments that are kind of like that, but almost infinitely more subtle, where it seems that kind of you're bringing in a kind of emotion that complements another emotion in a disorderly kind of way, and that lesser writers might not bring. So, like we were talking about sexuality, and we're talking about all these other churning forces and characters, kind of like as there are all these sort of things that perhaps we recognize, and we can we feel kind of they kind of seem like something familiar from other art, but then there's these other kind of unexpected elements too, and it's I mean, for one thing, it's the sort of the scatological sort of thing where people are I mean, I swear every other page has the word shit written in block capitals in this book, but it's but do you ever feel that sometimes you kind of do you ever feel that kind of happening within the writing itself? We go, okay, I've laid on a lot of this. Now time to kind of cut through with this. Not necessarily in a kind of now it's time to be ironic, but do you feel it's that kind of counterpunctual thing to the writing sometimes? Like
Well, you just have to go with the flow at the moment. I'll give you an example. You can't see it here, but I'm holding up the book here that I recently bought, but the WWE's biography of superstar Billy Graham. Now, end of this
oh
year, after I do another 10 or 12 plays, probably come summertime through the end of the year, I'm going to do a novel on superstar Billy Graham. So how do I do a novel on this wrestler when I've already done one on a wrestler named Gorgeous George? Now, superstar Billy Graham, he has
mm,
an interesting childhood. He grew up in Arizona. He was a steroid freak. He knew Arnold Schwarzenegger when he was young. There's a
mm,
lot of, but I was thinking, and it came to me. I said, well, and if you can see, I've got a lot of post-its taped on the front, and I've got the book here. I've got a lot of post-its at various scenes, which
make
some
notes to
I'll
yourself.
use some of these scenes. But I said the best way to open this would be maybe like that scene at the beach in the Antonioni Red Desert with the little girl is running and she hears music, and I'm thinking that
Mm,
I'm gonna I'm going to open this book totally away from the wrestling world that you wouldn't know it's the wrestling world. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of this 2 or 3 page reverie, we're going to hear like ding, ding, ding. And we'll see
mm,
the wrestler on the floor with a concussion that he shouldn't have got because the other wrestler maybe went off script or something.
mm,
So that's a way of bringing things in and bringing things together that would probably not work otherwise. But you have to think
Mm.
these kinds of things through. You have to reckon them. Most people don't want to do that because it's hard work. They want to just, oh, I have
Well,
I
it's synthesis, though, isn't it, Dan? It's that. I mean, that's synthesis in a nutshell, isn't it? Like the bringing together of disparate influences. You know, I mean, but there's still a few things I want to get through. I mean, for one thing, to just circle quickly back to those poems that we kind of begin the Grand and the Glorious with, there are all these sorts of images poking through that really kind of took me by surprise. Like sort of like Arcimboldi sort of is brought up, and it's Arcimboldi himself is, you know, if anyone knows the painter, he sort of a sort of surreal allegory portraitist, but like it's this sort of strange cobbled together sort of amalgam, a thing that looks like something but is something else, and is sort of, you know, deceptive in a kind of, you know, a surrealistic way, but also a very kind of playful way. Like do you have any like is like how did like Arcimboldi coincide with kind of like with that beginning, or did the poem just happen and then you went, you know, this is appropriate?
well, you're talking about the McLuhan. It's a poem on McLuhan that I wrote 20 some years ago in the 1990s, Arcimboldo. Uh, and
Yes, McCoy. Well, it kind of I couldn't quite tell because it kind of is the like it seems so eerily kind of prescient, kind of like all like and all the things you have where McLuhan kind of says, you know, the medium is the message, but the reader is the vessel. Am I right? I don't have the writing in front of me.
yeah, I mean,
It's
that's what I do that. Great artists tend to do that. I'm not gonna, you know, have, you know, I'm not gonna, you're gonna bring things together that stir the pot and become a stew. You don't want them to become a gray mass. You want them to retain some of the color and the original flavorings and whatnot. But you have to bring things together. I also have